then I'm going to be back later to do some
I don't know what this
adjustments.
is going to be like. I've never done this before.
Okay, and
But we can start. I don't know. Okay, go ahead. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I think the only homeschooling in a dedicated breakout session is homeschooling. So you have to be a homeschooler. You're not just going to pretend to be a homeschooler.
We'll pretend.
All right. All right. Hi. Well, here's one guy knowing that I'm a homeschooler. Hi, Bert.
That's good.
More. They're still coming in. Good. I'll say right away, our topic is listed as reading at home. And it's sort of something, the topic that Ed Beath gave it, even though we had a discussion about this. My actual focus will be the spoken word, okay, as we read aloud to students of various ages. So it's going to have a little bit maybe more narrow or maybe a little bit broader focus than I had someone come up and go, are you going to be talking about teaching reading at home? And my example of teaching reading at home, besides what my wife does, is just set the example and read. And it does as much as anything, if not to teach reading, it does as much as anything to encourage the love of reading. Your parents both have noses in their books. And if you look at us at around lunchtime, it's terrible. We have these little Barnes & Noble wire $5 stands, you know, and we all have a book there, you know, and kind of ignoring each other and eating and reading. It's a terrible habit. My mother-in-law hates it, but people who love to read tend to do that. My aim today is to get you thinking about the richness and the variety of reading aloud, the drama which is inherent in this book, which is often missed and misunderstood. And I'll use examples from my own family's homeschooling experiences. My name is Bruce G. I don't know if any, how many were here last year? How many sat in? I know you guys sat in on my wife's, last couple of years my wife Debbie has given the kind of a homeschooling curriculum presentation. She said, well, it's your turn this year. So I don't do the homeschooling. We've been homeschooling for about 13 years. And so I don't do the direct homeschooling. What I'm going to talk about is the part that I did play, and that has been ongoing for many years throughout our lives, even before we started homeschooling. I'm a self-employed woodworker. I'm married to Debbie. Hi. We have 3 children. We're homeschoolers, as I mentioned. We've been homeschooling for a long time. Our oldest is, we started homeschooling when he was in 4th grade, or at the end of his 4th grade year, and our 2 youngest have never been in the classroom, so it's kind of all they know. Anyway, we've been homeschooling long enough to know better. I'm hoping that I'm not preaching to the choir today. We'll see whether you learn something new or not. I'm also on the advisory board of the Chronic Institute, which is headed by my friend Ed Beath, Dr. Ed Beath, that we just heard him speak. The Chronic Institute has been a sponsor of the CCLE conference for the last several years, since its inception, I believe. Briefly, the Chronic Institute is interested in promoting a genuine Lutheran perspective in the areas of culture and vocation, developing a voice in the public square where there isn't a voice, for the amazingly unique perspective of confessional Lutheranism. In fact, the 3 big words that we at the Chronic Institute use to describe who we are: culture, vocation, and confession. A quick word about my kids. They'll be a part of my address to you today. We have 3. A scamp of a daughter, now turned 8 years old. Relentlessly artsy and craftsy, running everyone's life. And we also have a son of 13 whose passions are playing drums and playing baseball, and trying to avoid his Latin lessons. And we also have a son who actually is here today, Colin, who is 20, and he's a junior, or he will be a junior in the classics department at UW-Madison this fall. He's sort of our resident Latinist, and he's also our resident movie critic. Just a general idea of what I want to talk about. We all read to our kids. We all read aloud to our kids. But for some reason, most of us stop reading aloud to our kids at a certain age, usually when they start reading to themselves. Okay? I want to talk to you about our experience and some history about it, of what we have done over the last 10, 12 years, of continuing to read great literature out loud as a family together, okay? Now, years ago, my wife and I made something of a discovery, okay? This was before we had kids, when life was great. We fell into a pattern of me reading aloud to her at bedtime, okay? Various novels, nonfiction, whatever interested us. Our discovery was simply that difficult literature, when read aloud, and I dare say read aloud well, okay, becomes coherent, becomes interesting. For example, we both have tried to read Gabriel Garcia Marquez's novel, Love in the Time of Cholera, and we both bogged down in it. Long paragraphs. Long sentences in the paragraphs. Tedious detail. But when I read it aloud to Deb, we discovered that it became winsome, it became ironic, it was very, very humorous. And when we came to homeschooling our kids, we remember this, what may seem like a very trivial detail. Okay, over the years, as a family, in the evenings, we've fallen into a pattern of gathering together, all ages. We've got 20-year-old now, a 13-year-old and 8-year-old. We just kind of move that back 5 or 6 or 7 years, and you'll see what we had. We had a newborn, and even before the newborn, we had kids, we're reading to them. And one of the things I'm going to do, if I dig it out, is that, you don't get your money's worth unless you get a handout. And so I've got, I'll hand this out to you now if you want to just pass this around. I'll do it. Reading list. I've got to have a reading list. There you go, if you want to hand them out. Over the years, the cry, it just became a tradition, 4 or 5 times a night, a week, and it seems almost impossible. The only people I can really talk to this about are homeschoolers, because you're the only ones that really have a control over your lives. I hate to say it. The schools place such an amazing amount of control over the lives of children, in terms of the amount of homework they have to do, in terms of so many things, that you can't really control those evenings very well, and then school activities get involved and so on and so forth. And we all have that. But I found that homeschoolers are more receptive to this, that they can actually structure this. Now, I'm not telling you that you have to structure all the things I'm going to tell you today. I'm telling you so you can have some ideas about it, understand what its value is, and then maybe adopt whatever you want to for yourselves. If you're classroom teachers, this is something that you can adopt for your classroom teachers, because there's value here for any child of any age. All right? But for years, the cry has gone out through our house. We're going to read tonight, Dad? It's kind of a funny little thing. So having hopefully drawn you in, I'm probably going to chase you away now, because I want to talk a little bit about the quality of reading. And I really resist admitting that there are good and bad readers. Oh, hi, James. Nice to see you. Not going to intimidate me. I'm going to try and talk a little bit about rhetoric today. What I'm talking about is reading aloud, okay? And the value of reading aloud well to your family or to your students. It's very rhetorical. Last year at this symposium, we had a couple of presentations on the progymnasmata. And what that is, as I understand it, is sort of a pre-rhetoric rhetoric. It's getting kids of all ages prepared for the rhetoric stage of their lives, so to speak, if we can speak that way, by getting them to memorize poetry, getting them to memorize literature and so on, getting them to memorize scripture, and then to speak it out loud. And it was a very useful technique that in this past year my wife and I really adopted quite a bit. However, there's one drawback to it, and that is they need to have it modeled, okay? They need to have good quality reading aloud modeled for them, okay? And so there's a burden placed upon you, the reader, to be able to do this. I would like to think that people can learn to be good out loud readers, all right? Just as you can learn to be better actors, or you can learn to be better cooks. In fact, I consider reading aloud to be a kind of theater. Sometimes when I'm reading, it gets kind of that way too. My hands get going and they're kind of looking at me. I'll have some things to say about that later. It's important, however, as a reader, as the one reading aloud, as the adult reading aloud, to develop a sensitivity to the material being read. Are you reading Dickens? Well, maybe something of a British accent could be developed, or Scottish, or whatever it might be. In the course of our reading program, apart from scripture and the shared reading of plays, which we have done, and I'll talk about later, I've always been the reader in the family, and I have tried to use, British and Irish and Scottish and Russian and Hispanic, Slavic, French accents, to whatever extent they're successful, and on some nights they're better than others. It takes some practice. Stop laughing. Give me your best Midwest accent. The most challenging novel I ever read in my family was Dickens' The Pickwick Papers. I actually brought it because I might actually get the courage up to try and read some to you. Anybody read it? Or heard, it's just read out loud. What I tried to do was, the Pickwickians were a group of maybe 6 gentlemen that traveled around. Head was Pickwick, of course. But you try and have a different, unique voice for each one of them. You don't read it all the same with the same voice. You need to modulate it. So you've got the younger one with a little higher voice maybe, and Pickwick with his own distinctive voice. It's exhausting to try and remember who's speaking and then to try and get it all right. And we never made it through the whole novel. I finally collapsed out of exhaustion, which is a very mean thing to do, because the family is still wondering how Pickwick extracted himself from the marriage claims of this woman. My oldest son actually did go ahead and pick it up and finish the book. And I've been reading it a little bit. Another way of being sensitive to the material is simply in pace, the pace of reading. And I guess the best way to learn this is to read poetry, which, as you know, can be read very badly. It can be read beautifully, too. Or another way to do it is to hear plays being presented and hear how, for example, Shakespeare, how you can completely change and manipulate the meaning of a phrase by stopping at a certain point and then emphasizing a word. We were at a Shakespeare play at American Players Theater on Saturday, watching The Shrew, and it was a politically correct version of Taming of the Shrew, because modern sensibility, as the director said, simply can't stand the fact that women would be submissive to their husbands, and so he had to dress it up. And I remember one line by the Shrew, Katerina, that she said was, when she was honoring, even when she was doing the wonderful speech where she was honoring her husband, was his his honest will. Instead of his honest will, it was his honest will. And then you see the audience, a very liberal audience, Madison, Wisconsin audience, is going, oh, there you go, okay, I can live with that. Pace is important, and you can deliver a line, okay? And it's important in reading aloud also. It will vastly entertain your children. It will pull them into the story like nothing can. And I know you've heard bad readers. You've probably heard them in church. Okay, if you've got, like in our church, lay people reading scripture. It's just, it's tough. It could be tough. A final point on what I might call a skill of the reader. And that's obviously reading well as a form of entertaining your listeners. And it ought to be understood in that way. You're not just putting words into your kids' minds. It's entertainment. There's a style to it, but one must stay within one's abilities. The bad British accent may be worse than none at all. One might need to practice a bit. Even after years of doing this, it is still a little strange. Sit down with my family and just break into my Midwest Cockney version of, say, Conrad's Victory, one of these novels that we might be reading. My family's gotten used to it, and once I kind of get into it a little bit, delivery seems to be fairly natural. But it does need to be a natural delivery, and sometimes you have off nights, sometimes not. Sometimes you're just not going to be able to do the British accent, you're not going to be able to do... But, Dickens needs to be read that way, doesn't it? Or P.G. Wodehouse, the great comic. I mean, you just got to have that in order for it to really be cool. So, there we go. All right, why do we do this? Why is it important? I have a number of reasons. Number one, most controversial perhaps, younger children can have access to difficult literature much sooner than were they to read it themselves. Okay, here's an example. My son Jeremy, about 6 years old, and we gonna read that, Dad? Yeah, we gather. And my older son sits here. My daughter is still nursing. So my wife is sitting in another couch, and we're gathered together. My son Jeremy, who always takes up more space than his actual body, you understand? Boys like this, they fill a room. And so he would always spread out on the floor. There had to be a big space, and wherever anyone was, he was always over kicking them. And he'd have these beads that he'd bring out, a little sack of beads. And while I'm reading, he would create this amazingly complex, well, sometimes it was maybe a military thing with straight lines and little boing noises, stuff. But all the time I'm reading, he's down there, and he's lining them up, and he's got this thing going, and he's scooting over the other way, and we don't know what's going on. Extremely complex games. One time we're reading Anna Karenina, Tolstoy, and here he is playing this mysterious game of his own invention, as I mentioned, complete with these hushed battle sounds, these explosions, all this stuff. And I read for a while steadily, and this was, 7 or 8 nights into it, so we're in the 3rd, 4th chapter. I read for a while, and suddenly Jeremy raised his head, and he said, "Is Stefan Arkadyevich the same as Prince Obronsky?" "Yeah." And my wife and I look at each other and go, "Oh, he's getting a lot more in there than we thought." It was like, okay, and then back to the games. It was very funny. We go, "Yeah, it's the same person." And then it would get back in. Well, why is it important for children to get this exposure? All right, it may not be. Frankly, the more difficult novels we read aloud, we do so for the education and education of our oldest son and for the entertainment of ourselves. In fact, that Jeremy at age 6 or 8 was able to follow and understand was a bonus. He wasn't necessarily picking up, for example, the finer nuances of the sin of adultery. Okay? Fortunately, there were things going right over his head. We aren't actually big advocates for children reading well beyond their years. My mother did this to me, putting a number of books into my hand when I was way too young and I couldn't understand them. They're probably not going to get much out of literature which is years beyond their level of maturity and experience. What we are advocates for is children reading good literature, hearing good literature read aloud. And I think as I go on, you'll understand this a little bit better. But that means literature which employs a more expansive vocabulary than what you'll typically find written in, say, the last 40 or 50 years, particularly in children's literature. And it means exposing them to more complex sentence structures. When I was writing this by my wife, she said, Sunlight curriculum. Not that we use it very much, but among homeschoolers, Sunlight curriculum philosophy uses this challenging, reading list. All right, so that's that. Number 2, reading good literature aloud develops good listening habits. Pretty obvious. But in an age when television, in particular, and I'm probably not talking to the right group of people because I probably don't know television being watched here, but also the general pace of life encourages this reduced attention span we've been hearing about. Learning to listen to and follow longer passages is very important. Good listening habits develop focus, develop poise, develop the ability to concentrate, whereas television does the exact opposite. Just, All right, so that's all I'll say about that. Any questions about that? Number 3, reading aloud brings good literature to life in the same way that theater enlivens the written word. I would argue that literature was a lot of literature, maybe all literature, was written to be read aloud. And it's actually, I think, and I've run across this and I can't confirm it in any kind of scientific way, but this is sort of what 200 years ago, everybody read aloud, or they read with their lips moving. But we have become, think about it, we've become a whole culture of people that we read it all. We read to ourselves, And we never hear the spoken word except maybe on television or if we go to plays or something like that, or books on tape. Reading silently, I think, was kind of an alien idea. And in fact, there was the eloquent spoken word which the Romans considered the end of education. The highest end was to be eloquent, to be able to speak. You've got to hear those things. You've got to speak those things. So several times each summer, our family travels to the Spring Green area of Wisconsin to take in a selection of Shakespearean plays put on by the American Players Theater. The setting is an outdoors amphitheater in the hills overlooking the Wisconsin River, about an hour outside of Madison, Wisconsin. Beautiful setting. I've been attending plays there for over 20 years. My My sister has been in theater. My uncle started the Wisconsin Idea Theater many years ago, and so I think theater maybe runs in the family. We always went out there. We always did theater as throughout my childhood and growing up. And over the years, a rather remarkable philosophy has developed at this particular theater with regard to acting the written word. I'll read some things to you. These are excerpts from a recent article about American Players Theater in the Wisconsin Journal Sentinel. It's from the interview for the theater's artistic director, David Frank. Don't get me wrong. It's a very, actors in general tend to be really liberal people. If you go to theater schools, watch out, your kids can just, you're going to be exposed to all kinds of awful stuff. So I thought this was rather remarkable. He says, sometimes when you watch someone doing Shakespeare, it's very easy to understand. Sometimes it isn't. Why? Well, I don't care what literary genius you are. When you freshly look at a page of Shakespeare, particularly late Shakespeare, it is darn hard to understand. Well, the APT solution for this is to have its actors play the ideas in the text rather than the emotions. Concentrate on what Shakespeare is saying, and everything else will follow. If we simply show that the character is really terrified or really angry, we've deprived the audience of what is special for Shakespeare. The key component in dense verbal texts is the poetry, and the key component of poetry is figures of speech. He goes on, we try to focus on playing the metaphor itself rather than showing the audience what the metaphor means. Don't play the consequence of the metaphor. Make that metaphor dance for the audiences. Those metaphors are the way Shakespeare communicates the inner condition of the character. Be spontaneous and specific. Play the details of the sentence. Play the real images. Playing the real images will take you to the emotion, whatever it might be. Okay? Now, when our kids go to see Shakespeare under these circumstances, they come away understanding the story. They come away thrilled. They've had their imaginations exercised rather than manipulated. I really do recommend a trip out there if maybe you have a chance, except don't go see Damien to the show. That director chickened out. Well, it's a rare thing these days for modern actors to actually trust the written word. Okay? An age of rampant emotionalism, among other things, and politicalism and so on. Great literature handled with trust actually can unlock the imagination, opening the mind to the many subtle levels of meaning and nuance waiting there to be discovered. Okay? This is the great thing about hearing the word spoken and acted. Okay, finally, 4. Reading aloud as a family is very different from listening to books on tape. For one thing, there's the time spent together as a family, which is very precious. I don't want to emphasize that. I've known families that have had kind of this tradition, and I highly recommend it. A friend of mine at our church a few years ago said, around 9 o'clock, first of all, our kids are all night owls. My wife's a night owl. It's just, we lost control many years ago of this. And if everybody's bedded down by 11 o'clock, we're really lucky. So, you take this for what it's worth, but I lost my train of thought there. What did I say?
At 9 o'clock.
At 9 o'clock, yeah, thank you.
Friend from church.
They'd all gather together and just sort of sit down, have a cup of tea, and talk to each other. And find out where each other was in their day and what they were planning on doing tomorrow. These were young teenage boys, and maybe one a little over. I thought it was a wonderful idea. I think it's a great family cultural thing to do. Well, we did this in the context of reading. We pull everybody together from, drag them away from whatever they were doing and sit them down. And we always start with half an hour, 45 minutes of just reading the Bible. And we read the Bible straight through 5 or 6 times. Not doing Bible studies, just reading the Bible. And every now and then stop and go, I don't know what that means, or something like that. Just read the Bible. And then that's what we'd all do. And then I would pick up this other, whatever it was we were reading. Well, here's my favorite memory of those times we were reading together. We've read Tolkien's trilogy. You've all heard of it anyway? Read it? Okay. It's called Fellowship of the Ring. Probably better known now than it was 2 years ago. And we've read it along with his first book in the series, The Hobbit, many times out loud. I read it to Colin, my oldest, when he was 8 or 9. And of course he loved it and he wanted to hear it again. He also wanted to have Jeremy hear it. He was 7 years younger. Waiting for Jeremy to get old enough to hear the Tolkien trilogy. Now, I'm a furniture maker, I'm a restorer, my shop is on the same roughly 2-acre property outside of Madison, Wisconsin, several miles out in the country, that my house is on. And I had a particular project that spring. It was a cool spring, mosquitoes weren't out. I had an opportunity I was building a library for a client in New York City. So I was all day long spending the day reducing a pile of cherry wood to different pieces. And in the evenings, we'd gather and I'd take the cherry wood scraps and bring them out. We had a little portable fireplace. It's located in a huge side yard we have, about 1 acre in size, with big willow trees, and it's surrounded by pines, and it's very, very nice. And like I said, the mosquitoes were knocked down by the cool weather. It was nice to have fires through May and even into June. So we gathered out there about 8 o'clock. Light was good until 8:45, something like that. And we'd start a fire, and we'd do our Bible reading. And then I'd clip on my little, Barnes & Noble, power. Yeah, that's right, book light. And they'd start roasting marshmallows or whatever. And we'd read for a good hour, sometimes an hour and a half, until they'd let me stop. Tolkien's trilogy. And we've done this twice now. And it's simply magical. My kids will remember this all their lives. It was just neat that there was a barn owl up in the woods that would be hooting, and some, sandhill cranes would fly overhead, and there was a little yellow finch's nest not far away, and it's a huge overarching weeping willow tree and this fire, So we became like hobbits, with our pipes, except no pipes, and marshmallows instead. And I tell you, it was very, very rich. And so being in that environment is another idea you might have, but it really drew us together. Another element of reading aloud as a family is that it allows you to stop and discuss what is going on or to clear up a point. You have to understand now that the G family are pathological talkers during movies. When we gather to watch a movie, it's rare when it isn't paused half a dozen times to talk about something, pick it apart. And that continues today. It used to bother my older son, but now he's the first one. Stop it! We're watching a movie. What's going on there? Let's play that back. Play, and drive you crazy. See, someone would drive you crazy. That's not right. Same with our reading. Occasional humorous aside by somebody. It's far too common. Things can get out of control at times. This sort of behavior, as I said, might drive some of you crazy. But we find it is most helpful and frankly fun to discuss a book as we go along. And sometimes I'll just stop and close it. Okay, what's going on here? This guy is doing this, and how about this? Notice that? Pick that up? They go, oh, that's neat, I didn't notice that. And so it can really be a lot of fun. Then we open it again, start over. So what have we read? And like I said, I think this might be a limited benefit for you, but here's a book list, and my wife put it together, saying, I'm not going to need this. The first thing is a book lists. Honey for a Child's Heart, Read for Your Life, Books Children Love, so on, which if you want to do that. And the only other benefit of the other thing is that it just tells you what we've read out loud, everything we can remember anyway, over the last, say, 10 years. It isn't everything. And you'll notice that the first page and well into the second page, it's really younger kids' literature. This is kind of chronological. And we certainly start, Red Sails to Capri, Black Beauty, Gulliver's Travels. Oh, we took a step up. Okay? Genghis Khan, and so on and down, and kids go into Pride and Prejudice. Okay, something a little bit more sophisticated, a little difficult. Quo Vadis, a great book. If you know about the Brother Cadfael mysteries, they're wonderful, by Ellis Peters on page 2. I don't recommend the Earthsea trilogy. It's just something we were doing an experiment. Like I said, this is a list. A lot of the stuff my wife would shove the book. I said, what's next? She'd shove the book in my hands. And I want them to hear this because it ties in with something we're doing, our own schooling. So a lot of this was tied in specifically to aims that she had. And so it really became an extension of the homeschooling theater. They were able to hear these things rather than read them themselves. And they finally get down here to this long list of Dickens, which between the Dickens and the Russian novelists, my kids just got addicted to it. My wife finally said, no more Russian novelists. But you know what? Read out loud. You try reading on a Karenina. It's not easy. Read out loud. It just flows, it just flows. But we read August 1914 by Solzhenitsyn, and that's just pure torture. And The Idiot, like, that's just pure. My wife just said, please, please. And the boys go, more. So I don't know. Some of there's some history here. Miracle of Philadelphia by Catherine Drinker-Bowen, which is about the Constitutional Convention. Take it for what it's worth, okay? And I'll kind of refer to a few of these in a few minutes. Okay, next thing I want to talk about a little bit is novels and movies. And Christian certainly will relate to this. His book has an undue portion of it dedicated to movies. And we've occasionally done this. We've read a novel out loud, and then we've watched the corresponding movie that it was based upon. The very best examples I can come up with of this are Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, which has several wonderful productions. One in particular I can't remember, but I just love it. I've seen it 3 times, and I just love it. And then again, of course, Kenneth Branagh's movie productions of Shakespeare, As You Like It, Richard III, Henry V, right. And Hamlet, of course, my favorite. We always read the novel first, and this has the effect usually of making the movie seem a bit inadequate. Now, we've also read a few novels, very fine novels, and then watched aghast as the movie version absolutely destroys the premise of the novel. 2 examples of this are James Fenimore Cooper's Last of the Mohicans, and worse than that is Nathaniel Hawthorne's Scarlet Letter. But this is good too. This is a very, very instructional thing to them. They read it and they see, first of all, you can talk about the Christian underpinnings, and they understand those things in many of these books. And then you can see what happens when Hollywood gets a hold of it. That's a great bit of instruction for them to see that literally played out. Finally, actually I've got about 3 other things here, but I stopped writing about it, so I don't know where we are. The reading of plays. You might consider doing this when your kids get to a certain age. Or, I don't know, am I reading you guys wrong? Are you classroom teachers? You're a parent. Okay. Oh, you're not a teacher. Okay, well then I stopped talking to you about being in the classroom. It seems to me that we work in the classroom very well. You've got to get several copies of the play being read. We've done Shakespeare, we've done Julius Caesar, I don't know. We've done a number of them, and we've read them out loud. We start out by, again, we borrow from the library, we borrow from friends, we go to cheap bookstores. We think ahead. We want to read this, and we want to read as a group. So everybody gets involved. So this is sort of modeling it, but it's also rhetorical in the sense that the kids start reading it out loud, and you start getting this interesting dynamic. Now, the other thing to understand about a lot of plays, which are against a dense text like Shakespeare, is that read aloud, they do make a lot more sense. One of us usually has the good copy of Shakespeare with all the explanations for the words. I'm still trying to skills is, things like that, just old English or old, whatever, made-up words that Shakespeare might have come up with. We divide the parts up ahead of time, we have at it. All right? Read a scene, read 2 scenes, read whatever. It's great fun. It's great fun. The kids really get into it. What we've noticed, again, is that reading it aloud makes it more comprehensible. Kids seem to pick up the gist of what is going on and get drawn into the tale. And, again, as I said, it allows them a chance to practice their own read-aloud skills. And one of the things that I've found, and Debbie actually was sharing this with me and my wife, was that over the years, the kids didn't come into their rhetoric stage if they're one of them. If I could talk about it that way, is that legitimate? I mean, kind of every way of learning has a grammar stage, a logic stage, a rhetoric stage. When they begin expressing these things, because they've been hearing it and discussing it, and there's been a lot of verbal back and forth, they come into it fairly well-born, well advanced into it, and they know what inflection is. They know what, you can help me out here, all the different, they know how to read a book. They read it out loud so that it's interesting to hear. They've already been introduced to the idea that you can manipulate the text of a book by how you read it. And every now and then I'll stop and go, oh, wait a minute, let me read that a different way. And I go, oh, okay. And I'll read it a different way, and pause and emphasize different words. and it's pretty interesting that way. So there's that benefit. One other thing that I wanted to talk about was just the relationship of history and literature. In this, the example that I'll give you very briefly, and it's just another fun thing to do, whether you read it aloud or not, is we read, Tale of Two Cities, story of the English Revolution and the French Revolution. And then we read a book by Scott called Robespierre. And I can't remember, and then we read another one called, what was it, on a different level, read, oh, it's here somewhere. Anyway, what it was Robespierre was literally the history of the French Revolution. And just a wonderful story, a brutal poem. And read in the context, or either before or after, and I think we read it after we read A Tale of Two Cities. It really brought the history to life. So, great idea. Think about that as a possibility. The other history areas here, Miracle of Philadelphia. Some of the things that I haven't listed here are theology, because we've also spent a lot of time reading aloud the Book of Concord, and getting them to be hearing that, and then talking about, the points of that. It's really, really excellent. The other aspect of theology that you understand is you run into, when you read aloud and your children are there, and you come across inevitably you're coming across theology. Good theology, bad theology, bingo, you talk about it. What's being said here? Now, is that truth claim, is that good? Is that, would we agree with that or disagree with that? And you hear all that catechesis starting to come out. Go, wait a minute, Dad, that's bad theology. Or whatever, And then we say, well, sure it is, because maybe this is what he's really getting at. And the other benefit of reading it aloud is that when they do encounter it, rather than counter themselves and internalizing it and going, the writer says right here, it must be right, you can counter that by going, we don't agree with this. In our house, this is what we believe. And a lot of times it means reaching over that bookcase, pulling out the Book of Concord, finding out where in the Augsburg Confession that is, and going, now let's compare it with what is said here. So it's a lot of fun in that way. And actually, how long does this go? 3:20. 3:20. All right. Well, time for questions then. I think I already brought this up. It's just the whole idea of the Russians. There's some good. Solzhenitsyn wrote One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich, and it's really for teenage years. It's really a great book to read out loud and talk about, because it's a day in the life of a man in a horrible prison camp. But boy, in a context of history, this is something to read. The other Russians, I would say Anna Karenina is the next most accessible of the Russians. I want to tell you one other thing. It's really important. I'm glad I remembered it. One of the things that my wife and I discovered, I remember we were reading some popular modern novelist, Morgan's Passy, who wrote that? It was somebody popular. This woman writer. A lot of dialogue in it. And we read it out loud. I read it out loud to her. And then, immediately after that, we read John Steinbeck's Canterbury Road. And we were simply amazed at how you could hear the superiority of the dialogue that we may not necessarily have picked up for just reading it to ourselves. It's like we stopped and go, boy, Steinbeck really had it nailed. The guy is a genius when it comes to writing dialogue. And frankly, if you want to have a great deal of fun, and also introduce your kids to that, read his trilogy, which is Canterbury Road, Sweet Thursday, and Tortilla Flat. And then watch the movie, which is, I think, one of my favorite movies of all time, Canterbury Road, with Nick Nolte and Deborah Winger. One of the things you'll find is a wonderfully told story. You'll see in the movie that the writers of the screenplay actually added to it, and actually the stuff that wasn't even in the original novel, and did it in a very appropriate way. It actually works. And then you'll get to Tortilla Flat, which is Canterbury Road was based in Monterey, California during the Depression. The fish had all been fished out. It was an old fishery, and so it's just the leftover people that are left there. And this PhD in biology, who's a washout from a baseball team, who shows up and just wants to keep a low profile. Tortilla Flat, on the other hand, is this hilarious story of up on top of the hill over Cannery Row where the Hispanics live and the Mexicans, and it's simply delicious reading. When we read that, I adopted, amigo, my Hispanic accent, so I got going, that got pretty funny after a while, I don't know if it was very good or if Hispanics would be insulted, but my kids really like this stuff. You see the thing? And, part of that is that quick Spanish, even when they speak English. It's, hey, you know what, you do this. So you sort of get into that and skim over the words, and they get the gist of it, but it's theater. And they go, that's great. And there were times, literally, when I couldn't read for 5 minutes because everyone was just choked up with laughter. And again, that's the wonder of reading Steinbeck in the voice that Steinbeck is writing it in. He's not writing it in a Midwestern American white accent. It's an Hispanic accent. So you kind of have to try those things. Give it a try. And again, I don't know if that's something that is beyond some people. Maybe it's my theater background or something. I don't know, but it's something we've always enjoyed. I think that's all I've got. Unless you want me to read something to you.
Sure. Is it Russian?
Angus, and no, it's not English. Angus asked me to read a bedtime story to him, so I'll try this. And, like I say, you have good days and bad days. Well, I ran across this little passage here. This is actually Pickwick's valet, Sammy Weller, and he's having a conversation with his old dad. They meet somewhere, and they've got a little off time to do this, and they're both kind of from the lower classes of society, and they're just chatting. And the elder Weller is actually his wife died, he remarried because the younger Weller calls the older Weller's wife the mother-in-law. So it starts here. How's mother-in-law this morning? Queer, Sammy, queer, replied the elder Mr. Weller with impressive gravity. She's been getting rather in the Methodistical order lately, Sammy. She's uncommon pious, to be sure. She's too good a creature for me, Sammy. I don't deserve her. Oh, said Mr. Sam, that's weary self-denying of ya. Weary, replied his parent with a sigh. She got hold of some new invention for grown-up people being born again, Sammy. The new birth, I think they calls it. I should very like to see that system in action, Sammy. I should very much like to see your mother-in-law born again. Wouldn't I put her out to nurse? What do you think them women does t'other day? Continued Mr. Weller after a short pause during which he had significantly struck the side of his nose with his forefinger some half dozen times. What do you think they does t'other day, Sammy? Don't know what. Goes and gets up a grand tea drinking for a fellow they calls their shepherd, says Mr. Weller. I was a standing staring in at the picture shop down at our place when I sees a little bill about it. Tickets, half a crown, all applications to be made right to the committee, secretary, Mrs. Weller. And when I get home, there was the committee a-sitting in our back parlor, 14 women. I wish I could have heard them, Sammy. There they was out passing resolutions and wanting supplies and all sorts of games. Well, what with your mother-in-law worrying me to go, and what with my looking forward to seeing some queer starts if I did, I put my name down for a ticket. At 6 o'clock on the Friday evening, I dresses myself out very smart, and off I goes with the old woman, and up we walks into a first floor where there was tea things for 30, and a whole lot of women begins whispering to one another and looking at me as if they'd never seen a rather stout gentleman of 1850 afore. By and by, there comes a great bustle downstairs, and a lanky chap with a red nose and white neckcloth rushes in and sings out, "Here's the shepherd a-coming to visit his faithful flock." And in comes a fat chap in black with a great white face, a-smiling at me like clockwork. Such goings on, Sammy. The kiss a piece, says the shepherd, and then he kissed the woman all round, and when he'd done, the man with the red nose began. I was just a-thinking whether I hadn't begin to
especially as there was a very nice lady sitting next to me. Then in comes the tea, and your mother-in-law had been making a kettle boil downstairs. At it they went tooth and nail. Such a precious loud hymn, Sammy, while the tea was a-brewing. Such a grace, such eating and drinking. I wish I could have seen the shepherd walking into the ham and muffins. I never seen such a chap to eat and drink, never. What, the red-nosed man weren't by no means the sort of person you'd like to grub by contract, but he was nothing to the shepherd. Well, after the tea was over, they sang another hymn, and then the shepherd began to preach. And very well he did, considering how heavy their muffins must have lied on his chest. Presently he pulls up, all of a sudden the house up. Where is the sinner? Where is the miserable sinner? Upon which all the women looked at me. They began to groan as if they was a-dying. I thought it was rather singular, but howsoever I says nothing. Presently he pulls up again and looking very hard at me. He says, where is the sinner? Where is the miserable sinner? And all the women groans again 10 times louder than afore. Well, I got rather savage at this. So I takes a step or two forward and says, my friend, says I, did you apply that there observation to me? Instead of begging my pardon as any gentleman would have done, he got more abusive than ever, called me a vessel, Sammy, a vessel of wrath, and all sorts of names. So my blood being regularly up, I first gave him 2 or 3 for himself, and then 2 or 3 to hand over to the man with the red nose, and walked off. I wish I could have heard how the women screamed. Sammy, then they picked up the shepherd from under the table. Hello, there's the governor. Pretty like, and so on he goes with it. End of the story. So it's fun, it's kind of entertaining. And questions? Comments? Philoquia. Philoquia. The love of eloquence. Thank you. We cultivate in our children an ear for eloquence when we read aloud to them. Right? It's not something that you necessarily can do quickly, but I want to tell you something else, and that is your children love the sound of your voice. It's a very interesting little story in Sweet Thursday by John Steinbeck. There's a character named Hazel, and he's mentally retarded. It is said that he has the mind of a 6-year-old and the body of a bull. Huge man. And he'd follow Doc, who's the protagonist in the story. He'd follow him around, and he'd just ask him questions. And the reason he just asked him questions was to keep him talking. And the reason he wanted to keep him talking is because he just loved the sound of his voice. And, you know, our children love the sounds of our voice, okay? So you're already there. So just stress it up a little bit. You know? Work hard on that Midwestern accent there, Candace.
I think you really illustrate well, too, how you can't really divorce cultivating an ear for eloquence in them, but also cultivating discriminating and insightful reasoning processes.
Very good. Very good.
There's no way to divide the two.
Yeah, and I don't want to get on this too far, but you know, it was Romans 10. I mean, it's the spoken word that we hear in Scripture that really is underemphasized. We hear the word, we hear the shepherd, we hear the word. Well, this is not the same thing, but the spoken word is very powerful. More powerful than we think, and we're a culture of people who don't really have it except in twisted ways. So,
I just love this concept, Bruce. I really appreciate everything you said, because as Lutherans, you know, we teach the means of grace, and if I'm reading silently to myself, you know, it's like me and Jesus, whereas the spoken word is, you know, putting flesh on that, and it's goes well with our doctrine, I think.
you know, I wish I had this nailed down, but one of the points I was trying to make, and I've read somewhere, I apologize if I'm wrong, but that there were so few readers at one point in, you know, throughout history, that those who did read would read out loud. You've heard in monasteries that during the noon meal, there would be one lector who would come up and he would be assigned to read while they ate, and read scripture or read something from the church fathers or something, but it was out loud that people heard that stuff. You read in Patrick O'Brien's novels that, you know, when the mail barge came to the ships during the Napoleonic Wars, that, you know, the few who could read would read read out loud, read letters, the letters that came to the many who couldn't, so.
I appreciate this a lot. It reminds me of one of the chapters in Eugene Peterson's, one of his books. But my question is, I've often heard the argument from somebody, well, so-and-so is a visual learner. Therefore, to read God's word out loud to them or to speak God's word without letting them have the Bible open, for example, doesn't work because they're innately a visual learner.
Well, I probably would reject that. I think that a visual learner needs to hear, needs to start to listen, to balance that out. Because, I mean, if you're a kinesthetic learner, you need to learn to be a visual learner. If you're a visual learner, you may need to balance that out by being an oral learner. So it's a different kind of learning. I think I can't prove this, but I'm convinced that it exercises the brain in a different way than reading it. And there's another benefit for you, the reader. You hear it, you see it, and you speak it. So you really get it. The old adage that the teacher gets more than the student is really true when you read aloud. So I'm not sure my boys are all kinesthetic. They can't get their hands on things in order to learn anything. They couldn't learn math without, manipulatives. So I think it needs to be an element, it needs to be a part of your children's education. I think that if they are ever going to speak, visual learning is going to help them a bit. They need to hear it, and then they need to emulate it. And frankly, a large part of the theory of classical education is emulation. It's not. It rejects the whole idea that children create on their own, and it says, look, there are wonderful things from the past and from your elders that you should value and that you should emulate. And it's passing down those values that is an element of classical education.
You mentioned in the dramas that you've read, everyone took a part. Do you have your children read other books, or are you and your wife?
You mean at other times?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, as I said, at lunch nobody looks at each other. We just got our noses all poked in books.
Right.
So our kids, I was going to bring this picture from years ago. It made me look so good for one thing. When I was much younger, it was a picture my wife took of me sitting reading the paper. It was some Saturday morning, And my 20-year-old, when he was about 4, and he had whatever he was reading was upside down. And he's sitting there with the same look on his face, And it really is a great illustration. Because he didn't know how to, I don't know how old he was, but he didn't know how to read yet. But he knew that reading was cool. And they've all been, I think you've got to teach them. You've got to teach them the grammar of reading. You've got to teach them all those things. But it is this, giving them the example by actually using your valuable time to read that they'll see and that they'll emulate.
But to your 20-year-old or 13?
13-year-old.
Yeah, but do they take the time, or do they read some of the other books orally?
Oh, out loud.
Out loud, that's what I meant.
Yes, they do. Not quite to the extent that I have, because this has kind of become this dad's got to read kind of thing, which is there's no hard and fast law, it's just the culture at our house. Yeah, they certainly do that. My youngest, the precocious 8-year-old, who is just so, she's really given the 13-year-old run for the money in academics and everything else. It's just really scary to see how a girl can learn faster, at least this girl can learn faster than a boy. We have a friend who's an elderly man who's illiterate, and my wife's been teaching him to read. Well, lately she's handed the job over to the 8-year-old. And so the 8-year-old will read out loud to him, and then listen to him read out loud. It's on Sunday afternoons. We bring him home from church. And then she'll go, "No, Jim, you're guessing again." Yeah. Now let me read it for you. And then off she goes. So I think that's it. Thank you very much.